What if the thing that finally shattered wartime propaganda wasn't a surrender, a speech, or a heroic battle, but a single chocolate bar? In a dark cave on Okinawa in 1945, where families hid from the demons they'd been taught to fear, a starving child reached out her hand. And when she tasted the candy an American soldier offered, the story she'd believed her whole life began to unravel. In the final, brutal days of World War II, on an island already carved by cannon and fear, a single chocolate bar did what bombs and bullets could not. It turned an enemy into a friend. Decades of propaganda had painted the approaching soldiers as monsters, torturers who would strip away everything people loved. Yet in a damp cave, in the hands of a starving child, that small wrapped piece of chocolate became a bridge. It cracked open a story of hunger, mercy, and bewildering abundance. How could one tiny act unravel years of terror and make strangers into protectors? Spring 1945. Okinawa looks nothing like the tropical island you imagine. It is a cratered, smoke-choked landscape where artillery tears the hills and the sea is edged with bodies and ash. 300,000 civilians are jammed into caves and ruined villages, trapped between two mighty armies. They sleep on cold rock. They drink rainwater. Children with hollow eyes tug at mothers who have nothing left to offer. Food vanishes. Gardens burn. The island's rhythms collapse under a grinding, daily hunger that eats hope faster than any shell. Then the rule came down. The army took every grain, ration, and fish for its men. Storehouses were sealed. Food became a weapon. Worse, commanders broadcast a brutal order. Surrender is forbidden. Death is the only honorable choice. Propaganda hammered it home. Capture brings shame. Mercy is betrayal. Families watched soldiers patrol ration lines, saw bread vanish into uniformed hands, and realized survival depended on hiding scraps and luck. Hunger became a moral trap, pushing civilians toward caves and impossible choices. To enforce this, a relentless propaganda machine painted the approaching Americans as inhuman demons, monsters who would torture and kill without mercy. Leaflets with lurid drawings, school lessons recited like prayers, shouted warnings carried through villages. Loudspeakers blared. Neighbors told children stories of bayonets until the horror felt inevitable. Terror seeped into lullabies, squeezing communities inward, driving families into caves where the myth of the enemy grew monstrous. For Sachiko Nakamura and her little daughter Yuki, home became a damp, dark limestone cave. Light barely reached in. Faces were shadows. Nights were colder than winter. The air tasted of stone and old smoke. They huddled close, listening for footsteps, learning to eat only what the earth grudgingly offered. Their diet was wild grass and rainwater. Bitter blades chewed more out of habit than hunger. Shallow sips that never satisfied. Sleep grew thin. Every noise made heads snap up. Fear developed its own rhythm. Sharp inhalations, startled silence. But an even crueler enemy had taken root. Hunger. It wasn't loud like a shell. It crept in slowly, stealing strength and patience. Children's bellies swelled, limbs thinned, eyes dulled. Mothers counted scraps as if they were gold. More lives were lost to starvation than to gunfire. Quiet deaths in the dark, one after another, until the cave felt less like shelter and more like a holding place for grief. The elderly died quietly in corners. Neighbors who once shared rice and tea now scavenged alone. Survival became a private, brutal calculus. Okinawa's communal bonds frayed and snapped. The island filled with a silence that felt like grief made physical. This was the world propaganda built, a pressure cooker of fear and starvation. Loudspeakers and leaflets turned hope into rules. No surrender, no mercy, honor in dying. Families huddled in caves, rationing scraps until children's cries grew faint. Neighbors became competitors. Whispered warnings replaced conversation. The message lived not only in words, but in empty bowls and hollow eyes. Then the soldiers came. They filled the cave mouth like a dark tide, huge, alien, armed. Helmets glinted, rifles were ready. For a heartbeat, the propaganda's warnings condensed into a single image, monsters at the threshold. Sachiko clamped Yuki to her chest. Her heart hammered. This had to be the end. But the soldiers didn't move like demons. No roar, no brutality, just the scrape of boots and a cautious beam of light. Silence expanded. Fear collided with confusion. A soldier's hands moved slowly, not toward a gun. Private Tommy Kowalski froze at the sight of hollow-eyed families, dusty cheeks, sunken bellies, children clinging to thin limbs. These weren't enemy combatants. They were people. He reached into his pack, not for a rifle, but for something small and deliberate. Sachiko's instincts screamed danger. Her muscles tightened. But then she saw his hands. No steel, no shouting. Only a small brown rectangle wrapped in crinkled paper. A secret, an offering. He held it out. To Yuki, who had lived on grass and rainwater, the chocolate looked unreal, shiny, sweet-smelling, a taste from another world. Her fingers twitched. She reached. The first bite changed everything. Sweetness burst across her tongue like sunlight piercing rock. Her hollow face lit with surprise, then joy, then laughter. Sachiko's hands loosened. Heads turned. Silence cracked. Years of fear began to crumble. That taste was only the beginning. The chocolate bar became proof that the enemy could feed, not kill, could offer, not take. Curiosity replaced dread. And once curiosity cracked open, logistics followed. A steady river of rations reshaping daily life on Okinawa. American supply lines were an industrial marvel. Ships, planes, and convoys delivering canned meat, powdered milk, biscuits. It wasn't distant charity. It was a machine built to feed tens of thousands. To starving families, these warehouses and convoys looked like salvation. In Shuri, Sergeant Bob Martinez moved calmly and efficiently, handing out food to over 200 people. Order where chaos was expected, dignity restored in measured portions. Elder Taro Yamashiro, who had seen promises fail, whispered the unthinkable. The Americans are feeding us better than our own administration ever did. Relief and shame blended in the air. A belief cracked and hope seeped in. Staff Sergeant Mike O'Brien remembered the surreal surplus. Fresh apples flown across an ocean, canned peaches stacked higher than houses. Soldiers moved like busy ants, sorting, explaining, offering. To Okinawans, the abundance looked like sorcery. These warehouses were not simply stacks of food. They were a new kind of power, logistics as mercy. And mercy rebuilt trust. Soldiers shared bitter coffee around small fires. They handed steaming tin cups to trembling hands, and with each sip, fear softened. Stories slipped out about rain, lost homes, missing sons. Around those fires, strangers became neighbors. Children received chewing gum, mysterious, strange, delightful. A GI knelt, showing them how to chew, how to shape bubbles. Nervous giggles became shrieks of joy. Laughter returned to faces that had forgotten how. Kindness went deeper. American medics understood that starved bodies needed careful healing. They brought special formulas, diluted broths, vitamin tablets. Meals were given in teaspoons. Nurses taught mothers how to feed again. Body by body, color returned to cheeks. Children chased each other around makeshift tables. Interpreters like Corporal Eddie Nakayama bridged the final gap, carrying grief, names, questions, and relief from one language into another. His translations turned suspicion into conversation. By June 1945, these gestures had grown into organized relief. Over 150,000 civilians were fed daily through orderly distribution points. Medical teams coordinated careful refeeding. Volunteers kept lines calm. This was not improvisation. It was a system rebuilding trust. Women were taught how to prepare unfamiliar foods, how to open cans, rehydrate milk, brew coffee. They adapted quickly, blending American rations with Okinawan staples. Routine returned, pride returned. The first steps toward recovery took root. Then came seeds, tools, and training. Rice sacks, hand plows, irrigation pipes. Soldiers and Okinawan leaders worked side by side to rebuild farms. Dependence shifted to agency. Suspicion softened into cooperation. By August 1945, aid lines had become a new kind of front line, one stocked with care instead of violence. Over 200,000 civilians were fed, clothed, treated. Children once trembling in caves now ran with flushed cheeks. Elders lifted their heads again. Fear dissolved. Gratitude took its place. Women became cultural bridges. They traded recipes with nurses, taught neighbors how to stretch rations, reopened markets and schools. Friendships grew where fear once lived. Mercy became a shared responsibility. Children who blew bubbles with American soldiers carried that memory into adulthood. Many would grow into leaders who valued cooperation over isolation. A chocolate bar, a can of peaches, a shared cup of coffee became seeds of Japan's post-war transformation. Elders who once trembled at the sight of American uniforms became ambassadors of reconciliation, retelling the moment a soldier handed them a steaming cup of coffee. Their stories softened grief into curiosity and fueled decades of peace efforts. In the chaos of Okinawa, one encounter revealed a stubborn truth. Cruelty and propaganda can harden people, but they can be softened again by a single human choice. A chocolate bar, a cup of coffee, a steady ration. These were not trivial comforts. They were proof that mercy could outlast hate. Enemies became protectors. Communities hollowed by hunger learned to trust the hands that once held guns. Abundance became compassion. Mercy won out over revenge. And it all began with the simplest of acts, a soldier reaching into his pack and offering a trembling child a bar of chocolate. A moment, a choice, a chocolate.